A strip of Pacific coastline that grows a third of America's vegetables, runs the global technology economy, and moves more cargo than anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere. And it sits directly on top of one of the most dangerous fault systems on the planet. None of that is a coincidence. California isn't one landscape. It's 4 distinct geographic zones stacked side by side, each running on its own logic. Western Edge, a long, rugged Pacific coastline that's mostly unforgiving, but tucked into it are a handful of exceptional natural harbors. San Francisco Bay, an enormous inland sea connected to the ocean through a single narrow gap. San Diego, deep and sheltered to the south. These weren't accidents, they were invitations. Move inland and you hit the coast ranges, low ridges that block moisture from the interior. Cross those and you drop into the Central Valley, a flat, fertile trough nearly 450 miles long, sealed by the Sierra Nevada to the east and the coast ranges to the west. 2 major rivers drain it, funneling everything out through San Francisco Bay. Flat land, river drainage, port access. That's the blueprint for agricultural civilization, and California had it before anyone arrived. To the east, the Sierra Nevada, a wall, 400 miles of granite rising past 14,000 feet. For most of early history, it was a near absolute barrier. It didn't stop people, it forced them through a very small number of passes. That concentration of movement would shape everything that came after. Beyond that, desert, where geography stops being an advantage and starts being a problem. The Central Valley soil is deep and rich, built up over millennia by rivers pouring off the Sierra. The growing season is long, sometimes nearly year-round, but the valley doesn't get much rain. Its extraordinary productivity wasn't passive, it was engineered. Sierra snowpack provided the water. Canals, aqueducts, and reservoirs delivered it. Geography gave the opportunity. Infrastructure activated it. The result? Almonds, pistachios, grapes, tomatoes, strawberries, cotton, rice. California produces a staggering share of the fruits, nuts, and vegetables consumed across the entire United States. That's the Central Valley doing exactly what its geography set it up to do. Then there was gold. In 1848, gold-bearing veins in the Sierra foothills triggered the fastest mass migration in American history to that point. Tens of thousands of people poured into a remote corner of the continent in under 2 years. When they arrived, the bay was there, the valley was there. The infrastructure demand those people created built the ports, the roads, and eventually the railroads that defined California's economy for the next century. Oil came later, in the San Joaquin Valley in the south, making California an early petroleum powerhouse before Texas even entered the picture. Resource after resource, all of it drained and exported through the geographic system the terrain had already laid out. Here's how cities actually work. They form where friction is lowest. Every time goods or people move, there are obstacles, mountains, rivers, distance. Cities grow where those obstacles can be managed. California has 2 cities that illustrate this. One follows the rule, one breaks it entirely. San Francisco sits at the mouth of the only significant natural water gap through the coast ranges along the entire California shoreline. Before railroads, before highways, if you wanted to reach California's interior from the Pacific, you went through the bay. Everything funneled through this one geographic choke point. The city that grew there became the financial and commercial capital of the American West. Los Angeles is the more interesting story because it shouldn't exist. LA has no natural harbor. The coastline is shallow, exposed, and logistically difficult. By geographic logic, it had no business becoming a major port city. For a long time, it wasn't. What changed? The railroad connected it to the transcontinental network in the 1870s and 1880s. Then the federal government built an artificial port at San Pedro, what became the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, now the busiest import complex in the Western Hemisphere. LA is what happens when infrastructure overrides geography. What the basin did have was flat, buildable land, proximity to Pacific trade routes, and no ceiling on expansion. When humans decided it mattered, it did. LA built a port out of nothing. Liking and subscribing is easier than that. The Transcontinental Railroad is the other hinge. The Sierra had been the wall. The Central Pacific found the solution. Donner Pass. A single gap at 7,000 feet. Through it came the iron link connecting California to the rest of the continent. Every population boom, every industry that followed in the 20th century was downstream of that one geographic solution. California has 39 million people, the most of any state. But look at a density map and most of it is nearly empty. The Sierra is sparse. The deserts are almost uninhabited. The far north has a fraction of the population its size would suggest. The people are on the coast in two enormous clusters. The San Francisco Bay Area, roughly 8 to 9 million people, sits in a geographic bowl defined by the bay itself. The water didn't just create the port, it created a natural boundary that concentrated development, capital, and infrastructure in a compact space. The Los Angeles Basin holds somewhere between 13 and 18 million people in a coastal plain ringed by the San Gabriel and Santa Monica Mountains. The mountains stopped northward sprawl, so LA spread south, east, and along the coast. The basin became the container. San Diego anchors the southern coast, built around one of the Pacific's best natural harbors and a military geography that made it a critical naval hub. Between LA and San Francisco, no comparable city. The clustering pattern is a direct product of where the harbors were, where the flat land was, and where the trade routes converged. Geography didn't suggest this layout, it demanded it. Silicon Valley looks like the exception. It doesn't sit on a river, it's not a port, it's not a mining district. Technology on the surface has nothing to do with geography. Look closer. The Santa Clara Valley sits at the southern end of San Francisco Bay. Mild climate, flat land, and Stanford University, endowed with land from a railroad baron's fortune, positioned it to anchor a technology cluster built on proximity, talent, and capital. The Bay Area had already accumulated financial infrastructure and port-driven wealth before technology arrived. When the defense industry came to California in the 1940s and 50s, drawn by its Pacific coastline and available land for aerospace, it laid the foundation for the engineering culture that became semiconductors and software. Geography created the preconditions. Human decisions activated them. Every state has limits. California's are worth understanding. Water is the most fundamental. The Central Valley's productivity depends on Sierra snowpack delivered through hundreds of miles of canals and aqueducts. In drought years, the entire agricultural system comes under stress. Los Angeles had an even more acute version of this problem. The city exhausted its local water supply decades before the 20th century was half over. The solution, the Los Angeles Aqueduct, pulling water from the Owens Valley hundreds of miles away, is one of the most dramatic infrastructure stories in American history. It worked, but it locked Southern California into a permanent dependency on imported water. Fire is the second constraint. California's Mediterranean climate, wet winters, dry summers, builds up vegetation and ignites it. The Santa Ana winds, hot and dry, blowing from the inland desert toward the coast each autumn, were burning California long before cities were in the way. As development has pushed into foothill terrain, the exposure has only grown. Earthquakes are permanent. The Pacific and North American plates meet directly beneath California's most populated corridors, the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault. These aren't historical curiosities, they're active features that have reshaped cities before and will again. And finally, containment. The Bay Area Bowl and the LA Basin are finite. The mountains don't move. As those zones fill up, land becomes scarce, costs rise, and the very geography that created the wealth begins to constrain who can access it. So why California? Why did the most productive farmland, the most valuable technology cluster, the busiest port complex in the hemisphere, and the most populous state in the country all end up in the same place? It wasn't luck. It wasn't sunshine. It was a Pacific-facing coastline with exceptional natural harbors, a massive interior valley made fertile by Sierra snowmelt, a mountain wall that concentrated transcontinental access through a handful of passes, turning those passes into highways of wealth. A geography that faced the right ocean at exactly the right moment in history. Geography didn't write California's entire story. The decisions made about water, railroads, ports, and land use all mattered. The people who came shaped it. But geography set the incentives. It made certain outcomes more likely before a single decision was made. California started with better geography than almost anywhere else. The question for the next 100 years is whether the infrastructure built on top of it can hold. Subscribe. Next one, we find a state that started with worse geography and did more with it, if it exists.